how Socrates summarized Athanasius's restoration. He says, quote, "There each bishop from the East laid his case before Julius, Bishop of Rome, who sent them back again into the East, restoring them to their respective sees by virtue of his letters, in the exercise of the Church of Rome's particular privilege, and at the same time in the liberty of that prerogative, sharply rebuking those by whom they had been deposed."
Yeah.
Quote. Hold on a second. So before we were hearing that Rome's locked down to Rome. Alexandria is locked down to the provinces under Alexandria.
No.
Antioch's locked down to those seas. And what we have
this is ridiculous. By saying that somebody has a local jurisdiction, that does not mean that people don't make appeals to outside of those jurisdictions. This is common in the history of the church. This is well known.
Okay, well, but let me go on. I'll give you a Sozomen's understanding here. He says, so the Roman bishop, on learning the accusations against each individual and on finding that they held the same sentiments about the Nicene dogmas, admitted them to communion as of like orthodoxy, and as the case for all was fitting to the dignity of his see. Mm-hmm. As the case for all was fitting to the dignity of his see, he restored them all to their own churches. Now, we know that this was an exercise of jurisdiction. How? Because the Eusebian bishops wrote back and said, you can't do that. And they cited the canons of Nicaea to try and show that Pope Julius could not do that. So we have a few options here. We could say, yeah, this is just, Rome's just one of those Orthodox sees that, they were like the Mike Tyson of the time, and they had really good influence, and we could get there and we get them to write a letter and we can go back to the East and Or there's some legal right here that's being appealed to that has prior precedent.
Yeah, Eric, the legal right is what comes out of the synods and the honor that's given to the first see. If you are familiar, for example,
what synod gave this to the Roman see?
No, I'm saying that over time, that understanding is given to the first see, right?
Right, but we're talking about this at this moment in time.
The appellate structure is fine. I've never heard an Orthodox person disagree with that idea. Let me give you an example from Orthodox ecclesiology, right? So in the Russian Orthodox Church in America, we have the first hierarch, right? His name is Metropolitan Hilarion. He's the first hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia and in North America, right? So if there was an issue, he has a place of venerated authority, right? But he has no more bishopric than anybody else. But he does have a position of first hierarch, and it is a venerated thing. It is a powerful position. And in the same way, the Patriarch of Moscow has a very powerful position. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that outside of the norms of canon law, that he operates in some kind of special de vino. It's custom, right? That's what not Canon 6 of Nicaea appeals to, is custom. It's not an appellate to what is de vine, in our view, right? So absolutely, there is a long history of Rome being Orthodox, and nobody denies that. I mean, I'm very thankful that St. Maximus can appeal to Rome, that St. Athanasius can appeal to Rome. But if you read the letters of St. Athanasius, you will see many instances where appeals and issues are made to him as the Pope of Alexandria. That was his title. That's still a title of the Alexandrian Patriarchate, because the ecumenical councils gave the Alexandrian Patriarchate the title Pope. And in the same way, that's our view of the Roman system in the placement of the councils, is that it did occupy the first place, because nobody denies that Peter occupies the first place. But here's the thing. occupying the first place and having a canonical appellate system in no way, in our view, justifies the later accruing and evolution to where he alone sits in judgment upon all theological matters and make pronouncements ex cathedra, and he alone is given the charism of infallibility. That's the problem here, is that you can say all of these things that we would agree with, and you can try to reinterpret them. But I would just say, even Ratzinger in Introduction to Christianity, he says very clearly that there needs to be a tempering of the view of Vatican I, because the Orthodox perspective on synodal government was the perspective of the church in the first millennium. Ratzinger admits that in Introduction to Christianity, the supposed bastion of conservative. Yes, he does. He absolutely does. That's exactly what he says. Do you want me to read? I can read you the quotes. You want me to read them?
Well, we can get to that. I wrote a whole article on that, but I'd like to get back to what I was saying here with the Council of Nicaea.
Okay, but see, what I want to show is that throughout the discussion that I've heard, I've listened to the whole show, what you've done is essentially read back into these ancient statements, the Vatican I view, but you've also admitted that there's this evolution of dogma. And so just as there's an evolution of dogma that you admit about baptism of desire, backing up the idea that the Pope can now pray in the mosque and whatnot, or that people can be saved in other religions, in the same way, we are saying there's an evolution of dogma when it comes to the idea of the first see. Look at the way Catholic apologists will cite Irenaeus when he talks about why the Rome is the first see. He says because it's Peter and Paul. He doesn't mention anything about a special promise to Peter. He doesn't mention anything about infallibility. He says it's the doubly apostolic see, Peter and Paul. That's why every Orthodox icon has Peter and Paul holding the church, right? Because
I get annoyed too when I hear papal apologists appealing to Irenaeus. But I'm going back to this issue about Canon 6, because the claim was that this shows that there was limited jurisdictions.
Correct.
But I'm bringing to the table some alternative information here that kind of takes away from it subtracts from your argument.
Because again, we don't have a problem with the appellate structure. So if extenuating circumstances were such that my entire jurisdiction, this would could even happen now. Like, let's say that my entire area of Orthodoxy, say they believed in, they adopted Arianism. Let's say that all the Orthodox around me adopted Arianism, and I went to and appealed to the first hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church in America, Metropolitan Hilarion. And let's say he adopted Arianism for the sake of argument. Now, he hasn't, but let's say he had. I could then, if he adopted Arianism, I could appeal elsewhere outside of him to a more respected metropolitan area. And that's what we see in that structure that develops in the councils of the metropolitans, the pentarchy as it's called. They're interchangeable. People come and they go in this pentarchy. There's nothing magical about pentarchy, but eventually they become kind of normative. Then you get later patriarchates added, like Moscow, right? So there's nothing. We don't believe that what happens in ecumenical councils or in canon law, even though it's normative, it's not necessarily Davian, it's not necessarily divine law, because it's a little more flexible in church history. You have to do the principle of economia, right? And I think Roman Catholic canon law, people would admit that there's such a thing as economia, where local bishops have to make a decision about how to receive converts in XYZ circumstances, right? So that's economia. So there's a little more flexibility when it comes to canon law, whereas if it's divine law, and certainly canon law reflects divine law, but when it's divine law, you can't be flexible, right? Like, we can't change moral law and say, oh, well, now, homosexuality is of God, right? And then like 50 years ago, it wasn't. Although, again, I'm not trying to be mean here, but, but Francis has literally just said this. He just said 50 years ago, the death penalty was moral. We now no longer understand that to be the case. So again, there's this constant innovating and kind of evolving is the whole point.
A few minutes later,
the Roman See had a universal appellate jurisdiction.
No. Any of the important sees could be appealed to. For example, Athanasius gets appealed to at times, right? And if he gets persecuted, where's he going to appeal? He's going to appeal to the first see, right? But being,
hold on, let me go ahead and continue.
Listen, being the first in the appellate structure does not equate to universal jurisdiction in terms of infallibility. Now, if the church is in a crisis situation and you have, like in the Arian crisis, only a handful of bishops that are Orthodox, it absolutely makes sense why you would have the there's even a term, what's the term in Roman canon law, where in extremis, right? You could have an in extremis situation, which was not the norm, because actually the ancient canons say that you have to have multiple bishops present from the local metropolitan to ordain any new bishop, right? By the way, why did all that change after the second millennium, and now only the Pope ordains the bishops, right? So obviously there's a change in the view, because prior to that, the ancient canons do not say the Pope confirms every bishopric in the world.
Right. So yeah, let me get some space here, though. You talked about the appellate structure of the Orthodox Church. That's all I would have to appeal to in order to show that your argument on Canon 6 is wrong.
No, you have no argument on Canon 6 because you admit that there's nothing there except, oh, wait, it's not actually mentioned, it's just assumed. And let me show you that this guy who was at the council later in the extreme situation with the Arians did X, Y, Z. No, it's not there in the canon at all because let's church view it.
But this is what the listeners have. The listeners.
No, listen. Appellate structure to
how are we going to have an exchange here if you're?
It doesn't prove universal jurisdiction and infallibility.
Yeah, I got to have some space here to talk, Michael.
Yeah, go ahead. Jump in here, Eric.
Okay, so at the Council of Sardica, this is what the bishop father said. They said, quote, "For this will seem to be most good and very proper, if to the head, that is, to the see of Peter, the bishops of the Lord shall refer from all the provinces of the world." So I don't have to defend papal infallibility and all this other highfalutin stuff in order to refute what Jay was saying about Canon 6. The argument that Jay was making about Canon 6 is that there's only limited jurisdictions. The text is in his article there. And yet what we see admitted 15 years later is a universal appellate jurisdiction. And it's stated in Canon 3, Canon 4, and Canon 5 of Sardica. Any bishop anywhere in the world can appeal.
You just ignored the entire argument that I made. If I appealed to the first hierarch of Rocor, that doesn't mean that he has jurisdiction over all of America because he's called the first hierarch.
No, go ahead and respond.
Yeah, you can appeal. Whoever you appeal to at the highest level has an appellate jurisdiction.
Correct.
Yes. So that's what I'm saying here.
That's not infallibility.
But my argument was the table set here for this evening was not papal infallibility.
That is bound up with the doctrine. You have to defend that at Canon 6 of Nicaea.
Well, we can get to papal infallibility, but I would never go to where I'm going to in order to prove that.
Obviously not, because it's not there.
I agree.
Because
I agree. So
if
in other words,
agree it's not. You agree it's not there. So papal infallibility involves?
No. In the survived data of the Council of Nicaea, there's no evidence of papal infallibility. So there's no evidence of iconography. There's no evidence of the essence and energy distinction.
No, you're wrong.
See what I'm saying? So
you don't know about the essence and energy distinction in that regard. Have you read Dionysius?
What I'm saying here is I'm using a certain circumscribed amount of data to argue that your argument about the limitation of Rome's jurisdiction is wrong. I'm not arguing for papal infallibility. I'm not arguing.
That is part of the argument. Even though
all I would have to do is appeal to what you just said.
No, you have for your argument. Listen, for your argument to hold,
Eastern Orthodox Church.
You just ignored the argument and restated the position.
The patriarchal structure of receiving appeals is all I would have to appeal to.
Nope.
In order to show
it refutes you.
Rome at the time could hear appeals from anywhere else in the world, and
all of the patriarchates could.
No.
Yes, they could. Yes, they could. Athanasius heard appeals.
Okay, I understand Athanasius heard appeals, but
does that mean that Athanasius had a universal jurisdiction over everybody who appealed to him? For your argument to hold, that's what you'd have to say. That's why.
I wouldn't defend that at all. There were several.
That's what you have to say. That's what you have to say for your argument.
Let me give you an example, Jay. I can give you a perfect example. Okay, there was a bishop underneath the Patriarchate of Constantinople in the 6th century. His name was John of Chalcedon. He was accused of believing I want to say he was accused of a Gnostic or being a Pelagian. And he appealed above his immediate synod to the Patriarch of Constantinople.
Mm-hmm.
So the Patriarch of Constantinople set up court. They had a tribunal, and they found him guilty. So John of Chalcedon lodged an appeal to Rome. It happened to be St. Gregory the Great at the time. John showed his case to Pope Gregory, and Pope Gregory overturned that decision because he found out that they were misunderstanding what he was saying.
Right.
And he sent letters back to Constantinople saying this man deserves his see back. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That we're not getting into papal infallibility.
You have to include papal infallibility. That's part of the argument, even though you don't want to go there. That is part of the argument.
Look, Jay, there is something called, setting off an argument and choosing to go to another argument at a different time. If I wanted to argue for papal infallibility, I would have started on an entirely different footing here.
No, so but see, that's the thing is that you're not representing. No, that's not the debate. It's not a singular debate.
That's the rule of debate. It's a basic rule of debate, Jay.
No, it's not.
I'm not here arguing.
We're arguing worldviews. We're arguing.
If you want, I could switch to papal infallibility, but that's not what I'm talking about right now.
Yeah, right. Because all you're doing is appealing to an appellate structure, which doesn't prove the thing that you need to prove. All it's proving is that there's an appellate structure, and nobody disagrees.
Okay, so what you're saying is that all I need to come to this
have to do is give you one example, like Athanasius.
Besides what I came to prove, I don't understand. That doesn't make any sense to me.
That's not how worldviews work. That's why you're not a good philosopher. That's wwhy on the epistemic issue, you're also going to be crushed.
Okay, but
answer Eric's question.
We can get to the epistemic issue, but I guess we'll put a period here, and we'll let the readers and the listeners judge. Jay said that there's no other jurisdiction besides the limited metropolitan.
Appealing is not giving universal jurisdiction.
Okay,
listen.
If you admit, there's not a single historian that denies that Rome had an appellate jurisdiction.
Where you're stuck,
and that it was unlimited.
If Athanasius gets appealed to outside of his jurisdiction, does that mean he has a jurisdiction beyond his jurisdiction? No.
But here's what I'm trying to.
That just proves your argument.
No, it doesn't refute my argument because it's conceded by the Eastern Orthodox canon law that you could appeal to Rome in the first 10 centuries.
Prove universal jurisdiction and infallibility, and those go together because that's what evolved. That's what we're here to argue against. We're not here to argue against your particular papacy.
That's what you came to argue. But the title of the video, Jay, was Canon 6 of Nicaea. Okay, so look.
The papacy is a thing that it stands or falls together. It's a whole thing.
Right. Okay. And that's not exactly true.
That's totally true. It's a house of cards. It stands or falls together.
Okay. So you're saying that we cannot discuss the Council of Nicaea without discussing the clown masses of today? Is that your argument?
You can talk about it, but I'm talking about papal infallibility and all the papal claims and the universal temporal jurisdiction that all goes into it that later evolved. That needs to be there in Nicaea, and it's not.
Did the bishops in Chalcedon feel they needed to judge Theodoret if Leo had already reinstated him?
Well, they didn't recognize Roman jurisdiction in the eastern provinces. So Leo's reinstating for them was not decisive. A decision has to be made in the east. Theodoret's position at the